Good afternoon, Lara Giddings. Thanks very much for talking to us here on Afternoon Live. Are you expecting much of a fight on your hands to get this legislation through your parliament and adopted into law?
I suspect that through the lower house it will get through on Thursday. It will then need to be debated within the Legislative Council, and we'll see whether or not we're successful to get through that house as well. We never predict the outcome of those votes. A number of councillors like to keep their cards close to their chest, but I am hopeful that we will see this discrimination end here in Tasmania.
So it's far from a done deal at this stage?
No piece of legislation is ever a done deal until it has been debated through both houses of Parliament. But I am hopeful that we will see Tasmania lead the nation on this impressive and very important piece of legislation which enables same-sex couples to get married.
What sort of opposition is the legislation facing in the upper house?
Well, naturally, there are some within the community who don't support this form of discrimination ending, but I believe the vast majority now of Australians and Tasmanians want to see this discrimination end and see same-sex couples allowed to marry as heterosexual couples can under Commonwealth legislation. And while the Commonwealth legislation does not allow for same-sex marriage, that has provided a vacuum in that sense that states can fill, and that's what this piece of legislation does.
OK, we are talking about Commonwealth legislation, as you mentioned there. What about suggestions these laws could be challenged in the High Court? And Tasmania's opposition leader, Will Hodgman, has been saying today that it could result in a costly High Court challenge. We might just have a listen to what he had to say earlier in Parliament. And if I could ask you just to wait, Lara Giddings, I'll come back to you for your reaction.
And indeed, the very issue of constitutionality is one that continues to concern members on this side of the House, and is a very real and live issue, one which we've been told will come with an inevitable challenge to the High Court, which will no doubt come at a cost to the Tasmanian government, and a matter which, to this point in time, has not been disputed by the Premier, notwithstanding her statements in this House and publicly just a few months ago that it was her view and it was her advice that this would indeed be an unconstitutional move.
The Tasmanian opposition leader Will Hodgman speaking there, and Lara Giddings is with me from Parliament House in Tasmania. And there is scope for the states and territories to make laws in this area, as you're saying, Premier, but do you believe that the legislation can survive a High Court challenge?
It's certainly possible that there may be a High Court challenge, but it isn't inevitable in that sense. And I believe that what we've got in our same-sex marriage bill is the most robust piece of legislation you can have that would be able to withstand a High Court challenge. Now, if people were frightened of High Court challenges, we wouldn't have had the significant reform that we've seen in Aboriginal land rights, for instance, because of the Mabo challenge. And there are numerous other challenges that have gone on in our High Court that have enabled us to move forward with social reform. So I'm not frightened of any High Court challenge. And in terms of cost, what we're talking about is our Solicitor General, who we already pay, actually representing the state of Tasmania. So I don't believe the cost would be exorbitant.
OK, you believe it's a cost that your state is prepared to bear?
Absolutely. This is a very strong principle that the Labor Party and the Greens want to see upheld in terms of providing the most equality or equitable way of dealing with marriage for same-sex couples. It's the last bit of discrimination that exists in this nation, which at the moment prevents same-sex couples from being married. And we want to see that ended. Ideally, we would love to see that ended through the Australian Marriage Act. But while there isn't that movement occurring, and it's a very difficult debate, I think, to get through the Australian Parliament at this point in time, while Tony Abbott refuses to provide Liberals with a conscience vote, there is a vacuum there, and Tasmania is determined to fill it.
Well, while you're talking about difficulties, you're facing opposition from within your own party as well. Members of the Labor right have questioned your power to enact this legislation, even your political ability to get something like this through. What sort of pressure is coming from your federal Labor colleagues?
Well, in terms of the State Labor Party, I can assure you that it was around about 80% of delegates to our state conference supported a motion for Tasmania to lead the way on this important issue. And within our own Parliamentary Labor Party, we only have one member who will vote against this. And I respect his views and his right to do that. That's why I've provided a conscience vote, unlike Will Hodgman, who's refusing his members a conscience vote in the State Parliament. In terms of my federal colleagues, of course, there are those who are very supportive of this move and there are some who are against it. We are a broad church, the Labor Party, and there will always be some opposition. But like the broader community, I believe the vast majority now of Tasmanians and Australians want to see change, and we will help to lead that way.
And Lara Giddings, what do you believe will be the impact of this legislation for Tasmania itself? Could your state become the gay honeymoon capital of Australia as gay couples seek to exploit these new laws?
Well, let me be clear, this is being driven because of a principle in that most important instance in that sense. But of course there could well be an economic benefit to Tasmania as well, with gay couples from across the nation coming here to indeed get married. We've seen that in the different states in the US, for instance, where there isn't a federal law, but there are individual state laws that allow people to get married. And there have been couples who've gone to those states in order to be married, and I suspect the same would happen. So there would be an economic benefit to our state. But most importantly, this is about the principle of removing discrimination. We live in a day and age where we do not believe that people should face discrimination because of their race, their ethnicity, their sexuality. It's just not on, and this is the last piece of discrimination that's still in place.
OK, Premier Lara Giddings, thanks very much for talking to Afternoon Live.
Thanks, Nick.